I love Sun Devil football. It's relevant. How is it relevant? I will tell you why very soon. You'll have to stay curious for a few moments, and that's good. Curiosity is the key to our faith. So it is a good place to start and stay. And start there we do. To wit, I asked Kimberly, our music director, to give me 3 hymns upon which to base a reflection. Of course, as a genre, hymns are meant to be sung and heard. And it may seem overly obvious, but to hear the message of a hymn, we must listen. And yet this month's theme is vision. So quite unwittingly, I gave Kimberly the assignment of conveying sight, vision, through sound, hymns. And that is curious. It's also curious. Sight via sound. Our practice today is synesthetic. Synesthesia is the confusion of the senses, or maybe the expansion of them. It's the connection and interplay and overlay of one sense upon another. It's like when you see numbers as colors, or when you taste sounds. Some people do this naturally. Some people are induced into it, I suppose. Today we will practice it. Practice synesthesia. But how do we practice synesthesia? How do I, in words, reflect on songs about seeing? Where do we start? And the answer here is the same as it always is to almost any question. It should be obvious. You start with football. Sun Devil football. I get a lot out of watching football, actually. It's, there's entertainment and adrenaline, there's family time, there's the opportunity for me to let my emotions have a life. I cry more during football games than most memorial services. And occasionally there are nuggets of wisdom. And here's one. There's no such thing as luck, only being prepared for opportunity. I first heard that from Lou Holtz, former coach of Notre Dame, and right there is a fair summation of my take on ritual and on our Sunday practices in general. We prepare for opportunity here. Speaking of which, another football aphorism, you play how you practice. If you are not the you want to be in this congregation, there's little chance that you will be the you want to be outside of it. That's why we practice, right? Another bit of wisdom, this one from NFL head coach turned ESPN analysis turned head football coach of Arizona's most prestigious university, Herm Edwards. He once said, "You play to win the game." I'm not sure what theological application of that one yet. But here's a Hermism that helped me into today's reflection. As the Devils were gearing up for the season back in August and competing for starting spots on the team, Herm shared his player evaluation technique. Herm says, "I listen with my eyes." I listen with my eyes? That's synesthesia again. I listen with my eyes. So what is he saying? What I'm hearing is that there are many different ways of listening. You can listen with your eyes. You can listen with your body. Of course, it's a metaphor, but in the land of metaphor, we're all ears. I remember, and maybe some of you have done this, going to concerts and putting myself right in front of the speakers, the stacks of speakers, so that I could feel the music with my full body. Have you ever done that? That will teach you that there are parts of you that can hear that you can't see. We can also listen to history. You could listen to a memory that makes no sound in the present. You could listen with your mind, with your heart, and with your soul. Perhaps you can even hear through or along with the mother soul, that receptive aspect of the collective consciousness from which we delineate and to which we happily return. So, what are we hearing today? What have we heard? What have we sung already? We started with the hymn, "Be Thou My Vision." The lyrics are from a long poem written in Ireland sometime between the 8th and 11th century. And sometimes between then and now, it was set to the traditional tune of Slain. Is that right? Slain? Slain. Which is the same tune as another hymn in our and many other hymnals, "Wake Now My Senses." "Be Thou My Vision" is not only a poem, it is a prayer, and a specific kind of prayer at that. It's a lorica, which is a prayer for protection. So why protection? The poem was composed during a time of clan warfare. In its longer and complete version, it envisions God as a chieftain protector. Our hymnal, of course, leaves that out. If we have to do God, we do not want him as a warrior king. That we are able to make this decision speaks to two things, at least. One, that we have the privilege of peace. And two, that given this privilege, we would choose it again and again. Our choice of lyrics locates us both historically and theologically, ethically, and challenges us to wonder whether our current theology of peace is as much a product of our historical moment as theirs was. Whatever the theology, "Be Thou My Vision" is decidedly theistic. Perhaps Kim was trying to tell us something. Whatever it is you think of God, the quality of the God in this hymn is you're imploring when you sing it, you're imploring something that is abiding, something that abides through, in, and beyond all transient treasures and trials. You're imploring some kind of universal constant. Or if not a constant, then a universal integrity from which we can draw wisdom, strength, and in its ever-presence, even companionship. We ask that it be by that integrity that we view the world, so that it will be with clarity of soul that we conduct ourselves. Our pastoral hymn was composed much more near in time and theology. Hymn number 391, "Voice Still and Small," was written in 1940 by a Unitarian minister. That's a quarter century before the Unitarians and the Universalists merged. It was written by a Unitarian minister, and oddly enough, or perhaps not so odd at all given the time, it references the Bible, right? So here's the one Sunday of the year where I'll reference the Bible. The phrase still small voice references the Old Testament book of Kings, chapter 19, verse 11. I'm sure you all know what that is, but we'll go through it anyway. There we are met with Elijah. He's a prophet on the run. He's been working his butt off in the name of his God and against the followers of a competing deity. But despite all his work, and it is dirty, hard work, he is still a hunted man, and so he has to go hide in a cave. And while he's hiding, he hears the word of God. God asks Elijah, "Elijah, what are you doing here?" At which point Elijah complains to God that he's kind of getting a raw deal. And that's where we pick up at the action in verse 11. God said, "Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." As an aside, yes, this is God talking about himself in the third person. And it doesn't make sense to me if you and I are in a conversation and then you say, "Go outside, I'm going to pass by." I'm going to look at you like you just ate a Tide packet. Like we're talking just right now, you and me, we're talking. Anyway, Eli goes outside. And there was a great wind. I'm reading again. There was a great wind so strong that it was splitting the mountains and breaking rocks in pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of sheer silence. It is this sound of silence that the King James Version of the Bible translates, and when it comes to King James Version, I use the term translates with great liberality. What the King James Version calls a still small voice, the more accurately translated New Revised Standard Edition calls sheer silence. It is a still small voice that has tumbled through history to us and to our hymn today. But it's an interesting contrast of translations. God manifesting as a still small voice versus God manifesting as sheer silence. What is sheer silence anyway? God as absence? One thing both translations share is the notion that God, the ultimate, the great creative, sustaining, destructive energy, the reality beyond our perception of consequence and time, the moment containing all moments, is described not as cacophony, not as power, not as mass, but as something far more intimate and something quiet. Another thing both translations share is that God is presented as an audible metaphor, centering God in sound rather than sight. But whereas King James calls it a still small voice, scholars translate it as an utter lack of sound. To recenter onto the audial and then discount the audial, that's a curious literary trick. When Elijah heard it, or didn't hear anything, or didn't hear it, or heard not it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And this is kind of a cool image. I see it as purple dusk, that interval of perpetual aftermath and coming rest. A haggard Middle Eastern man hangs from his rags, recently released from the grip of epiphany, shaken but not shaken. Then there came a voice to him that said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Okay, so that's funny, because that's right where we started. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And Elijah's like, "I don't know." And he says, "Come on, I'm going to pass by." And he makes the earth shake and then develops sheer silence. And Elijah's like, "Oh, God." Goes out to the edge of the cave, and God still says, "What are you doing here? What are you doing?" So here's what I'm taking from this, because after God tells this to Elijah, he goes out, he tells Elijah to go out and do some really terrible things. And all the amazement and wonder and on-point wisdom that the writers had conjured with the sound of silence, the still small voice, is squandered on some tribal Baal bashing. But the nugget remains for us. And here's what it is as far as I can see or hear or not hear. God is not what you think God is, whether you believe in God or not. And perhaps God is that great generative silence and emptiness in the midst of all things. But whatever God is, they never stop asking you, "What are you doing here?" For silence is everywhere, and silence is generative. It calls into being. Now, what will you do? So we go back to the hymn. "Sheer silence deep inside us all, I hear you call, singing. I hear the silence singing, silence in the depth of every note. And in that silence, now what will you do? In storm and rain and sorrow and pain, still we remain singing. But what are you doing here?" That emptiness, that befuddlement that is God queerly calms our fears, quenches tears through all the years singing. So what? Come on. Bring it. This is action from emptiness. And now we're talking Zen. Our closing hymn, which we'll get to in just a moment, is Sanctuary. We stole this hymn. We stole the first hymn too. This hymn we stole recently. It's a Christian spiritual. And I had the name of the guy. I forgot it. I didn't write it down. But, it's a contemporary song. The original lyrics are much longer than what we sing. And of course, where we sing, "Make me aware that we are a sanctuary," it says, "Lord, prepare me to be a sanctuary, pure and holy, tried and true. With thanksgiving, I'll be a living sanctuary for you." So we have stole the tune and some of the sentiment, a few of the words, and baldly changed it. And I don't think we asked permission. I asked permission of the person who changed it some to change it more. And so it goes. And that is also both very Unitarian Universalist in the sense that we draw from a great breadth of traditions, bring something of our own to it, and make it integral to what we believe. That's very UU, but it's also wise in the sense that it echoes the truth that life is an interpretive event. You are your attention. Your job is to make connections between traditions and experience. Your job is to listen. To listen with your eyes. To listen with your mind, to listen with your whole being. You will learn much about yourself. when you listen in this way and receive the wisdom present in all experience. If we place our faith in a universal spiritual integrity, we may be at peace in the wake of all manner of tumult, and therein and within hear the song of silence that asks us, "What are you doing?" And by the power of that integrity and curiosity, we may build of ourselves a holy place of safety and courage and connection and care. That is what I heard in those 3 songs. Go Devils. Please rise and body your spirit, and let us close by singing our stolen hymn, Sanctuary. We'll sing it through 3 times. The last time the piano will drop out.